Tonight, a little rainy here, but the White House is in state dinner splendor. French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife arrived yesterday, attended a dinner at Mount Vernon. Today, though, all about the pomp and circumstance of France and the United States, nearly 240 years of friendship.
Let the United States and France stand forever in solidarity.
Vive les États-Unis.
Long live the United States. Long live France. Thank you.
We have to work together because we've always worked together.
Too bad it's not just us doing the negotiating for the rest of the world. Mr. President, they're all saying what a great relationship we have, and they're actually correct. It's not fake news. He is perfect.
He is perfect. They have a pretty good relationship. Any minute now, the Macrons will be at that state dinner. You saw the arrivals there, the couples, 150 guests roughly. There you see the dining room, all spearheaded by the First Lady, Melania Trump. She is running point and talked a little bit about the dinner. It's going to be interesting. We'll get the full readout tomorrow. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Here comes the story with Martha. Martha, we're not there. I mean, what happened?
It looks pretty nice. Thank you, Brett. As you say, breaking tonight, a big first is about to happen live at the White House in just a moment. The President and the First Lady, Melania Trump, will welcome President and Mrs. Macron to the White House state dinner. Everybody lined up and ready to go. We expect it to get underway literally any moment. It's the very first state dinner hosted by the Trumps. Today, we watched in real time historic foreign policy maneuvering between France and the United States, as President Trump appears to have succeeded in cracking open the Iran deal that he has railed against. Here's what the French president said that got everybody's attention on that. Watch.
We therefore wish from now on to work on a new deal with Iran.
Sur cette voie.
I therefore would like us to commit to that effect in the weeks and months to come.
Saying he would work on a, quote, new deal. The president gave a bit on his part in pulling our troops out of Syria. Here's a look at his past and present on this issue. Listen carefully here.
We're knocking the hell out of ISIS. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. We'll see what happens, but we're going to be coming home relatively soon.
Note the new phrase there, relatively soon. But what does that mean exactly? General Jack Keane, Mark Thiessen, and former Obama State Department diplomat Y.J. Fisher here on that in a moment. But first, while so many are mired in cabinet politics and investigations, it is hard to imagine anything that is more pressing than the nuclear threats from Iran and North Korea and the instability in Syria, which puts the U.S. at odds with Russia in the Middle East. That is what our two countries, France and the United States, are discussing here at the White House over the past couple of days. The stakes are enormous. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry, live at the White House to break it all down tonight. Hi, Ed.
Martha, good to see you. Right. Pardon me. The stakes could not be any higher for these two leaders because you have the fact that Iran's foreign minister warned on Sunday if the U.S. pulls out of the nuclear deal, Iran will speed up its nuclear activities. But what President Trump's critics don't seem to realize is that there appears to be sort of an emerging pattern here with his negotiating strategy that may actually be working. Remember, when the president amped up the rhetoric on North Korea and warned of fire and fury, his critics charged he was bringing America to the brink of nuclear war. Yet Kim Jong-un is now coming to the table announcing he's freezing nuclear and missile testing. Now there may also, as you suggested, be the makings of a breakthrough on Iran from today's talks. The president again talking tough, declaring the 2015 nuclear deal is insane and he wants to scrap it, adding if Tehran restarts its nuclear program, quote, you can mark it down, they'll have bigger problems than they've ever had before. While French President Emmanuel Macron still supports the original deal. He unveiled what seems like a compromise today as President Trump faces this May 12th deadline on whether to again waive sanctions against Iran or just get out of the deal altogether. Macron saying he wants to address his counterpart's concerns by building on the 2015 agreement instead of throwing it out. Listen.
This is a deal with decayed foundations. It's a bad deal. It's a bad structure. It's falling down. If Iran threatens us in any way, they will pay a price like few countries have ever paid.
It is rather about building a stable framework that will contribute to stability. It's not about tearing apart an agreement and have nothing, but it's about building something new that will cover all of our concerns.
Now, these two men have built some rapport after working together, of course, on the recent airstrikes in Syria. But there's also a split that we can't paper over about how long the U.S. will keep troops there. Mr. Trump saying he wants to make big decisions in a very short period of time, while Mr. Macron wants that stretched out. Remember, though, on Iran, the president's critics have suggested there's only two options: either keep the Obama deal or scrap it altogether. The significance today, Macron seemed to be opening the door to a third way, Martha.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We are watching, as you see, the red carpet rolled out at the White House. So as we watch all of this, and we're going to go back and forth here with the live events unfolding at the White House, I want to bring in General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General, good to see you tonight. Obviously, as we mentioned in the open of the show, the stakes are huge here, and these are two of the most important players in the future of the nuclear status of North Korea and Iran.
Yes, most definitely. Let me just go back over what I think is really happening here when it comes to the Iran nuclear deal. Macron and the president both do not like the deal. Both of them are willing to fix it with a supplemental. That'd be the 3 European countries and the United States. And they both make the assumption, if they were able to do that, that the Iranians would stay in the deal, mostly for economic reasons. However, if they couldn't get the supplemental, Macron wants to stay in the deal anyway, despite its imperfections. The president will nix it, and he would no longer waive sanctions come May 12th or some other date if he dragged it out a little bit longer. What they've been working on for weeks now is the fact that the United States diplomats and Europeans have been working on this supplemental. And there's 3 things that they're dealing with, 2 of which they agree on. 1 is prohibition on ballistic missile testing. 2 is access to the secret military sites with full inspections. Both of those are not in the deal presently. We have agreement on those 2. What we don't have agreement in is on the so-called sunset clauses, which permits Iran in 10 years, 2025, to get to a nuclear threshold, and then 5 years later, a pathway to a nuclear weapon. The 3 European countries do not agree with us that we want to extend that clause indefinitely. We want to remove the sunset nature of that clause. So that's kind of where we stand right now. I'm hoping that Director Pompeo gets confirmed quickly, and he can put his weight into these negotiations with our 3 European allies to see if we can fix it. If not, for sure, then we're heading for a termination.
All right. Jack, turning to North Korea for a moment, here's President Trump on the issue of denuclearization. Watch from today.
You believe in complete denuclearization. What does that mean exactly?
It means they get rid of their nukes. Very simple. They get rid of their nukes, and nobody else would say it.
The president said today, General Keane, that basically we had made no concessions so far in advance of this meeting, and that the North Koreans had made many. What's your take?
Well, I think he's absolutely right. First of all, this does feel a little different to me because of the number of concessions that the North Koreans have made and the sort of diplomatic blitz that they've been on ever since the Olympics, in setting up the talk with Moon and setting up the talk with President Trump. All that said, they have always used these negotiations to take advantage of their position and to manipulate us, and primarily to ease up on concessions. Certainly, he's going to put easing up on concessions on the table. I know for a fact that the Trump team will not buy that unless they have absolute commitment and evidence that they're dismantling their nuclear program. So we have a pretty firm position. Certainly, we will throttle back a little bit on that if that evidence is there. and also we want our 3 Americans out of North Korea.
Absolutely.
But that will not get us a deal. That's sort of like step 1 in good faith in terms of negotiations.
All right. Well, we'll see. I know you feel strongly that Mike Pompeo should be approved and able to get to work on it. Thank you so much, General. Good to see you tonight.
Yeah, good talking to you, Martha.
So on the right-hand side of your screen, for the folks at home, the red carpet rolled out. We are waiting for the French president and his wife to arrive at the White House for the very first Trump state dinner. We saw some of the guests arriving earlier. Henry Kissinger, John Bolton, and their wives arrived. Ivanka Trump, we also saw walking in. We're going to keep you posted on some of those arrivals, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there. But while we're watching all of this pomp and circumstance, let's bring in Mark Thiessen, American Enterprise Institute scholar and former chief speechwriter for President George W. Bush, also a Fox News contributor, and Y.J. Fisher, former State Department policy advisor to Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, and she helped implement the Iran deal. YJ, let me start with you, because during the course of the campaign, one of the things that Hillary Clinton was arguing was that President Trump wanted to rip up this Iran deal, and she thought that was a huge mistake. And you're one of the people who helped do all of the lead-up negotiations to make this deal happen, and yet you feel, it sounds to me like you now agree with President Trump that he's right to want to make changes.
Well, I think it's really important to start by saying that the deal is working, right? The IAEA inspectors have said that multiple times. So there's good reason to make sure that we preserve this deal because it's working. And I actually want to note one thing that General Keane was saying. I think it's also really important to understand what the deal actually covers, right? This issue about IAEA inspectors having access to military sites, they already do. Right? The additional protocol already allows them to have access to all sites, declared and undeclared, civilian or military. So for those reasons, absolutely, we want to keep this deal. But of course, it's always better to get more concessions from the Iranians. I absolutely would love to see the Iranians curtail their ballistic missile program. And I think that there is a bigger deal to be had where they could curtail their ballistic missile weapons program in exchange for the U.S. relaxing its remaining sanctions.
Yeah. Mark, you always hear the president talk about the billions that went over on the plane as part of this deal, and he believes that they have continued they're the leading state sponsor of terrorism, that they have used that money that we gave them to keep doing that. He thinks this is a bad deal. What do you think on what we saw today and heard from the French president and President Trump?
I think he's made some breakthroughs with the French president, and it would be good if we could get the French and the Europeans on board to closing up some of the loopholes in this deal. This deal is actually worse than the deal that Bill Clinton cut with the North Koreans in 1994, because back then the North Koreans had to cheat on the deal in order to develop nuclear weapons. Here, the Iranians don't have to cheat because the deal doesn't shut down any of their nuclear sites. It allows them to continue to do R&D on centrifuges and modernize their reactors, and it has no restrictions on ballistic missiles. So they just have to, and it has a sunset clause in 10 to 15 years. So they just have to keep on chugging along as they are, develop their ballistic missiles, and in 10 or 15 years, they can break out as a nuclear power with missiles that can hit Israel and other places. But the other big flaw of the deal, Martha, is that this was supposed to be heralding a new era in our relations with Iran. It was supposed to change Iran's behavior. Look at Iran's behavior around the world. They're funding terrorists across the world. They're continuing to hold American hostages. They just sent drones from Syria over Israeli territory. They're testing ballistic missiles that can reach Israel. They're funding a Hezbollah army in Syria that is going to cause terror across the world. They're funding rebels in Yemen. I mean, if that's success, I don't know what failure is.
Yeah, it's a great point. YJ, what do you think?
I think what's really interesting is that President Trump's fixation on tearing up the nuclear deal has actually distracted him from pushing back against Iran in the region, right? If President Trump and National Security Advisor John Bolton and Secretary of State nominee Mike Pompeo actually wanted to push back on Iran, there is a set of steps that they would be taking, right? They would be cutting off Iran's air, sea, and land access to its proxies, which they use to send material and personnel to their proxies. They'd be keeping Iranians from building up a presence on Israel's border. They would be reducing the IRGC's grip on the Iranian economy, which is a really important source of funding for the IRGC. And yet we don't see the administration doing any of that because they're solely fixated on ripping up the nuclear deal.
Mark, you're laughing. Why?
You just described the Yeah, because you just described the Obama policy. Obama was so fixated on reaching this deal with the Iranians that he completely took his foot off the gas on all those things that she just described. They were bending over backwards in order to get this deal and turn the blind eye, to the point that they even sent over $150 billion in unmarked bills on a plane to Iran. So the idea that Trump is distracted by the Iran deal, that's the Obama Iran policy described in a nutshell.
But I mean, you're both pointing out something that's wrong with the deal, which is that it didn't have any impact on behavior. It allowed them to still act as a proxy in Yemen and in Syria. It was very isolated in terms of what it addressed, YJ. And that's part of the problem that the president sees, you know, and Mark's saying that the deal that you helped construct is exactly why we're in this box.
I think it's definitely true that this is a deal that only addresses the nuclear program, right? And that's why I would say that the Obama administration complemented it with an aggressive regional approach. And it's the regional approach that we're missing from the Trump administration. I think one of the things that the Obama administration definitely recognized about the potential of the nuclear deal is that it had the ability to weaken the hardliners' grip within the country, right? And so ripping up the deal would actually make Iran, would actually embolden Iran quite significantly. But regardless, it absolutely needs to be complemented by a strong regional approach. And that's something we should all be asking the Trump administration to put forward.
Yeah. Mark, I want to change gears for just a moment as we wait and watch this. It's about 14 minutes after the hour, and the White House was going to get started with the dinner at 7 o'clock. They're usually fairly punctual, but we're watching. Maybe somebody's having a tough time getting ready for the evening. But I want to ask you about this Ronnie Jackson issue. The White House, the president spoke with his personal doctor, who he has proposed to head the VA, which is really one of the most important, fundamental things that he wanted to fix in his presidency. He talked so much on the campaign trail about doing better by our veterans. So he proposed Admiral Ronnie Jackson for this. Came out of it, essentially, the message came out that he was going to stand by him. What do you think is going on behind all this?
I think it's good that the president is standing behind Ronnie Jackson. I worked with Ronnie Jackson in the White House. I know him. He's a good man, and he's exactly the kind of person that we need at the VA right now. I mean, one of the problems we have, everyone's going around saying, well, he doesn't have management experience. Well, you know what? The last two VA secretaries were managers. Shulkin was a hospital administrator. His predecessor was the CEO of Procter & Gamble. And look at all the problems that the VA had under their leadership. Ronnie Jackson, what Ronnie Jackson brings to the table is leadership. He's a Navy Rear Admiral who was a combat medic on the ground in Iraq. He was the guy who, when the helicopter landed with a guy who had just been blown up by an IED, Ronnie Jackson is the guy who stuck his hands in his body and got blood all over his hands trying to save that guy's life and stabilize him. He understands the plight of our veterans in a way that no VA nominee ever has. And so I think having Ronnie Jackson, somebody there at the top, he can surround himself with all sorts of management experts, but you need a veteran who understands, who has seen the trauma that these people have experienced on the battlefield, who has treated these people, who has literally felt their blood on his hands in order to save their lives. That's the kind of leadership you need at the VA, and I'm glad that Ronnie's sticking, according to the news reports, he's sticking in it, because he's exactly the right person to lead the Veterans Administration.
All right, the White House senior official saying this: he has never even been the subject of an Inspector General review, and he will certainly not be railroaded by a bitter ex-colleague who was removed from his job. You know, I think people are so quick sometimes to decide that someone has to go because something has come up in the process of vetting them. And we saw today, I think, sort of an egregious example of people immediately piling on before there was even clarity on what these issues were. And Ronnie Jackson himself said he hadn't even seen the details behind some of the things that were being said about him. So sometimes it is a good idea to pause and take a moment and consider a man who has had a very stellar career and probably deserves a very good, clear look and assessment.
And put his life on the line for our country.
Absolutely. Mark Thiessen, YJ Fisher, thank you very much. Good to see both of you tonight.
Thank you.
All right. So as we watch the red carpet this evening at the White House, I am joined now by the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Tennessee Senator Bob Corker. Senator, good to have you with us this evening. Thank you for being here. As always, your thoughts on, you've been obviously, everyone says this when they talk to you, but it's a fact. You've been critical of the president. You guys have had your ups and downs. When you look at what has been at least appears to be opened up today. Redoing the Iran deal. You're talking about sitting down with the leadership in North Korea. You've basically called this president rash and immature at times, but it looks like he is checking a lot of boxes in terms of foreign policy. You're the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. What do you think?
Well, I talked to the president this morning right before he was getting ready to meet with Macron, and we talked about the hearing last night for Pompeo. Look, I'm glad we're meeting with North Korea, and I'm glad that Pompeo was a person to go over and meet. That's always been our back channel. It's their intelligence agency. So I'm hopeful that something's going to come out of that. I don't know what the details were today about the Iran discussions. I know the big issue to the French, German, and UK leadership has been this whole sunset issue, which the president rightly has asked for, and that is to end the sunset provision so they're not at a breakout place after 10 years. So we'll see where it goes. I know that Merkel's coming in a little bit in just a few days, and so between the two of them, we have shared with them that the president will leave the agreement on May the 12th if a new framework agreement is not put in place. I believe that he will leave it. And I'm hopeful that these leaders will understand that and come around with a framework agreement that'll be a better situation for our country.
Yeah, the president sort of gestured over to President Macron today and said, I know what I'm going to do, and he has a good idea of what I'm going to do. Do you think they were talking about leaving the deal?
Sure. I mean, he's been very transparent about that. I've met with him multiple times on this issue. He feels the same way about it he did when he was campaigning. We've been working together over the last year, us and the National Security Council, to try to figure out a way to overcome some of the deficiencies. But I really do believe that if the Europeans, the three countries, don't come along with a better framework agreement, I believe he's going to leave the deal.
Yeah, your thoughts on what happened last night. Your committee was doing the process of approving Mike Pompeo for his next position, if he's approved by the full Senate, as Secretary of State, and it looked pretty rocky, and some people questioned how you were running the whole thing. What do you have to say about that?
Question how I was running the committee?
Yeah, that it shouldn't have been as difficult as it was, perhaps. What's your response to that?
Oh, it was an outstanding outcome, Martha. All week long, people had been saying that he was going to move out with a negative recommendation. And we ended up having a logistical issue with Johnny Isaacson needing to be in Atlanta for a funeral where he gave the eulogy for his best friend. And we were able to get a Democrat to come over and vote present, so that there's some rules where the people have to be there in person when they're the deciding vote. And so I've heard nothing but just the opposite, so I don't know who you've been talking to, but it was an outstanding outcome, which was the reason the president called me this morning.
Up until the final vote, it looked like it wasn't going to pass. And, I'm just, looking at it from your perspective as the leadership on the committee, did you feel like it wasn't going to pass? Until Coons said, okay, I'll vote present? It sounded like there was, a lot of last-minute wrangling.
Well, there was, but we were always going to vote him out. The question was he going to get a positive recommendation or a negative recommendation? And we were able to work it in a manner which it worked out very favorably. So,
Senator, stand by for 1 second. I just want to, we're going to watch this for 1 second.
Okay.
There you have it, a great presidential tradition and the first state dinner of the Trump White House. Everybody looking elegant, heading into the East Room for about 150 people. Often they will include members of the other party, members of the media. This is not doing that this evening. We saw some of the dignitaries walking in earlier this evening, but it's generally a smaller group, and the whole thing has been helmed and overseen by First Lady Melania Trump. So we watch as the military stand guard after the president and Mrs. Trump and the president of France and his wife walk in, and the doors are about to close as they get underway for dinner. So Senator Bob Corker has been watching this with us this evening. And Senator Corker, as we take a look at this, I do want to ask you one more question, because I had your fellow friend Marsha Blackburn on, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, on last night. And I know you guys have had a little bit of awkward back and forth over support. And I know you say you support her, you've given the maximum amount to the campaign, but your answer was less than enthusiastic. On Sunday, you didn't even say her name when you talked about her. And here's what she said when I asked if she really would love to have your support.
I have not talked with the senator, and I am focused on making certain that we win this election in November. I would love to have Senator Corker's support and the support of every Tennessean.
So, Senator, what do you have to say to her tonight?
Well, she knows, Marsha knows she has my support. We've actually had a conversation about it, and, I sent the maximum contribution some time ago. I've told people I plan to vote for her, and all I've said is that the person running against her, the governor, is a friend, and I don't plan to campaign against him, but I certainly plan to support her and have supported her. And I don't know why this has even been made a big deal of. I mean, this is what is happening in Florida and Pennsylvania and races all across our country where people have served together. They're supporting the person of their party, as I am with Marsha Blackburn, but they're saying nice things about the other person. And last night, you saw a Democratic senator step across the aisle and do something that was great for our country and calls Mike Pompeo an outstanding nominee. To not have the blight on his name of coming into the Senate possibly with a negative recommendation, but a positive recommendation. And part of that is because of the way that I deal with people on the committee. It's the way I deal with people all across our state, trying to bring out the best in them. But I am supporting Marsha Blackburn. You know that. Everyone else knows that. And I just continue to not understand why it's such a partisan atmosphere that if I were to say something nice about somebody I've worked with for 23 years, a Democratic governor who was a mayor who I've worked with for all this time, for me to say something nice about that person while at the same time saying I'm fully supporting Marsha Blackburn somehow or another in this world, that is problematic. I don't get it.
Well, I'm glad we gave you a chance to clear that up, and I'm sure she'll be happy to hear your full-throated support for her tonight. Senator, thank you very much. It's good to see you as always. Thank you, sir. Fox News alert. Remember the caravan that is headed through Mexico? We are watching the progression at this hour because they have arrived. But the president and DHS is saying that they will not be allowed across the border. The coming showdown next. With this Fox News alert moments ago, the caravan of Central American migrants has reached the United States border. It's been on the move really over the course of the last month, but tonight it has arrived, and that is sparking a lot of controversy as hundreds of people arrive in Tijuana, reportedly planning to seek asylum in the United States. It is happening despite President Trump's promise to deny them at the border. The president and his team have been pushing back hard. The president tweeting in part, I have instructed the Secretary of Homeland Security not to let these large caravans of people into our country. It is a disgrace. We are the only country in the world so naive. Wall. His DHS chief, Kirsten Nielsen, writing, quote, if you enter the United States illegally, let me be clear. You have broken the law, and we will enforce the law through prosecution of illegal border crossers. And then Attorney General Jeff Sessions stating, quote, these individuals and their smugglers ignored the willingness of the Mexican government to allow them to stay in Mexico. Sessions went on to call it a, quote, deliberate attempt to undermine our laws and overwhelm our system. But that strong push is not settling so well with some. Mexico's former president, Vicente Fox, wrote an editorial in Newsweek today, headlined this: "The American dream is dead and Donald Trump killed it." Here now, Enrique Acevedo is a Univision news anchor. Enrique, good to have you here this evening. What do you think will happen when there is a showdown potentially at the border? You've heard how serious all of the Trump administration is about not letting these 600 people roughly cross.
Thanks for having me, Martha. As you pointed out, the caravan was never going to cross into the U.S. From the beginning, the plan was to reach the border and request asylum, and that is perfectly legal. Suggesting that this group of immigrants was going to drive across the border Mad Max style, as the president did, is simply not true. We're not facing a national security crisis. We're facing a humanitarian crisis.
I mean, one of the questions is why? You know, why does Mexico allow all of these people to come through Central America, through their country, and in some cases encourage them to keep going and cross the border, instructing them about the best ways to seek asylum? Does that seem right to you, given the fact that Mexico turns back tens of thousands of people and has very strict border law?
Well, like you say, Mexico is working on enforcing its law, its immigration law, on the south portion of its border. But I think the public here in the United States needs to recognize that the largest factor driving undocumented immigrants into the country is not a weak, unprotected border. These immigrants are very aware of the dangers they face, and still they choose to risk their lives to provide a better future for their family. We used to call that the American dream, and now Attorney General Jeff Sessions calls it an intent to overwhelm our legal system.
So you're confident that none of these people are going to try to cross the border?
Well, they've said that their intention is to reach the border and then request asylum. They're mostly women and young children. Mm-hmm. They're fleeing violence in their home countries, violence fueled in large part by drug consumption here in the U.S.
I think Americans are very sympathetic to their plight. It's a question of legal immigration and illegal immigration. I want to put up one more quote by Vicente Fox, who said in 2000 there were over 1.6 million arrests, and in 2017 only 300,000. See, Donald, fewer and fewer Mexicans and Latinos want to go to your country. The American dream is dead. You have killed it. And yet, you know, I guess the question is, why isn't Mexico more welcoming? Why isn't Mexico providing an economy and a safe environment that these people who come across your southern border wouldn't want to go there and stay there?
Well, if we're trying to use Mexico as a point of reference to what we should do in the U.S., I think we're using the wrong example. I don't think we want to compare any of our, decisions to what is taking place in Mexico, because Mexico treats those immigrants in the most horrible ways. And we've criticized that, and we pointed that out through history. I think we have to look at our own history and the way we've treated immigrants in the past, Martha. And this is just not consistent with that. If we turn our backs on these people, if we keep using them as scapegoats,
there are people from all over the world. There are people from Eastern Europe. There are people who want to come to this country, and they have to go through a process in order to do it. And they are very upset that they have to go through the process, and yet coming across the southern border is supposed to be a different set of rules. What would you say to them?
Well, I went through that process, so I'm part of that group of people who got in line and requested to come into this country legally. And these are also people who are trying to do that. Like I said at the beginning, they are trying to reach the border and request asylum, and that is perfectly legal.
Enrique, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Good
Martha.
to have you here tonight. We'll watch what happens in this border situation, which could be heating up. Good to see you tonight. So there are new reports that Nancy Pelosi's leadership position may be in jeopardy, no matter the results of the upcoming midterms. But that did not stop her from going after Republicans during an event today at Georgetown University, which we watched very closely. Mo Alithi hosted it, and he's here next.
I say to my colleagues, you pray in church on Sunday, and then you pray on people the rest of the week. What is this?
So Nancy Pelosi's political future could be in jeopardy as Congressman Jim Clyburn warns that if Democrats are not able to win the House in November, he basically said the entire old guard of leadership must go. And at a town hall event today at Georgetown University, she ran into some skeptical college students, including one who challenged her now infamous comment about crumbs from the GOP tax cuts.
In terms of the bonus that corporate America received versus the crumbs that they are giving to workers to kind of put the schmooze on is so pathetic. It's so pathetic.
Correspondent Kristen Fisher live in Washington with the latest on the leadership crisis that Democrats may be facing. Hey, Kristen, good evening.
Good evening, Martha. Well, today, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi said if Democrats win the House this November, their top priorities would be preventing gun violence, improving infrastructure, and protecting dreamers. But one undocumented student told her that that's not soon enough.
How many more letters we have to write, how many more phone calls we have to make, how many more dreamers have to come to D.C. to visit members of Congress.
On Easter Sunday, no more DACA. Why would you, as President of the United States, say on Easter Sunday, no more DACA? What's that about? It's about people, human beings, all God's children. They go to church on Sunday, a lot of these people who are so anti. And I say to them, I say to my colleagues, you pray in church on Sunday, and then you pray on people the rest of the week. What is this?
Another student confronted the House Minority Leader over her infamous crumbs comment when she referred to the GOP tax cuts as crumbs for the middle class.
Specifically referring to its effects on average Americans as crumbs. As the son of small business owners, I know that it's helped my parents hire more employees, it's helped us pay off our mortgage, helped put me through college. Would you still refer to the effects of this tax plan on average Americans as crumbs?
Yes, there are some benefits that some are feeling in a particular way with the tax bill. My statement was really a fuller statement that says while they provide a banquet for the top 1%, they're giving some crumbs to other people.
Now, the reaction to the Congresswoman on campus was unsurprisingly mixed. The young Democrats in the room mostly supported her answers, while the young Republicans walked away underwhelmed.
My initial reaction to Leader Pelosi's speaking was she kind of continued to exclude young Republicans in every way.
The truth is, thousands of dollars are really only crumbs to a person like Speaker Pelosi, maybe folks in her San Francisco district. But to small business owners and working families all across the country, and those who are being hired by small business owners, they're not crumbs. They're the whole loaf of bread. They're what you're taking home to feed your family at night.
I've never been more sure that I was a Republican until after I heard her speak.
One thing that the Congresswoman was not asked about was something her number two, Congressman Jim Clyburn, said, his comments last weekend when he said point blank that all of us have to go, meaning all of the Democratic leadership has to go, including Pelosi, if Democrats do not regain control of the House this November. But even if they do win, she still may not be Speaker. She's facing mounting opposition from Democrats who say that she's been in charge for too long, for 15 years, and it's time for change. Martha?
Really interesting, Kristen. Thank you so much. Joining me now with more, the host of today's Georgetown Town Hall event with Leader Pelosi, Mo Alethi. Mo, good to see you tonight. You know, it is interesting, the crumbs issue and the tax cut, because it does cross a lot of party lines. Do you think that Democrats feel that maybe they made a mistake in not making that a more bipartisan effort?
Look, I think, if you go back and listen to the full answer that she gave today, I think she actually kind of went out of her way to say, yeah, there are some people and there are some ways that this thing helps, but the predominance of the benefit is going to the top 1%. That's not to say other people aren't getting some benefit, but at the macro level, it's helping the top more than the bottom. And it was interesting. Look, what we tried to get out of this today was what is the Democratic Party's values? What is its message to young people?
And what was it, would you say?
It was interesting. We asked Speaker Ryan the same question when he came and did a similar event with us. They both went to opportunity, but they went at it from different ways. Speaker Ryan and the Republicans went towards individual freedom as the means towards opportunity. Whereas today, Leader Pelosi kept coming back and back to the same issues of justice and economic security. So to me, that's a really interesting juxtaposition that actually makes for a fascinating debate heading into a midterm year if we can get past all the other stuff that seems to be crowding that debate out of the picture.
No, it is fascinating, and I love that there was a diversity of thought among the students at this today, and to hear both sides of what they thought. I think if everyone graduates from college with a real understanding of the difference between what it means to be a conservative and what it means to be a liberal, and what both sides represent, that's a good education. Mo, thank
and Martha,
you very
one last thing, such a respectful dialogue. Even between the students who disagreed with her, such a respectful dialogue.
It's great to see. And you know what? Kudos to you, Mo, for fostering that at Georgetown with these events. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha.
Good to see you tonight. So speaking of all that, Bernie Sanders has a new plan to slow down unemployment. He wants to guarantee every single American a job working for the government. So what would that cost, and would it actually work to get us to zero unemployment? Charlie Hurt and Adrian Elrod debate next.
We need to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. And when we do that under my plan, we create 13 million decent-paying jobs.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders promised millions of new jobs on the campaign trail. Now he wants to use your tax dollars to make the federal government guarantee a job paying $15 an hour plus health benefits to any American who wants one. But one small problem, he can't say how much that would cost. Sanders joins a wave of Democrats pushing guaranteed jobs and universal basic income. So is this the future? Or perhaps is it a Democratic pipe dream? I guess we'll find out in the election. Joining me now, Charlie Hurt, political columnist at the Washington Times and a Fox News contributor, and Adrian Elrod, a Democratic strategist and former strategic communications director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. So, Charlie, let me start with you. I guess, you know, Bernie Sanders is essentially a socialist. So it's not all that surprising that he believes that we should use people's tax dollars or increase their taxes to make sure that the government can pay everybody to work.
It really is amazing, Martha. And when you read the reports of this plan, we haven't seen the actual plan, but when you read it, it almost, I thought it was from The Onion or something. It's so comical because, of course, these sorts of things have been tried and they fail. You know, these are more false promises from politicians who have been in Washington far too long. As you say, Bernie Sanders has been here for nearly 30 years pushing this socialist agenda, and he's absolutely failed at all of it. And the idea, you know, one of the few accomplishments he can point to is the reform of the Veteran Affairs Administration, and that was 5 years ago. And anybody in America who thinks that the Veteran Affairs Administration is working well can get behind Bernie on this. But the notion that somehow you fail at all of this and you're going to get you want more money and more power to do more harm, it's just preposterous.
Yeah, I remember, Adrian, when I was in college, I went on a tour in the Soviet Union, and the tour guide told us that everyone had a job. That everyone had a job. And I figured out how that worked because we stayed in a hotel, and on every floor of the hotel there were two hall ladies, they were called, and they sat in a chair, literally, and just watched people go by. Is that what Bernie Sanders is suggesting here?
Look, here's what I think, Martha. I think I smell a Democratic primary going into 2020 on the horizon. You have Bernie Sanders that has presented this bill. You've got potential candidates for president, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, others who are supporting their own jobs plan. So, you know, I think, look, I don't think that anybody really thinks that this type of plan is going to pass.
But we're at 4%. We're at 4% unemployment. You know, economists say that full employment is 5%. So we're already below that. Is this really, you know, what they want to tackle?
Well, look, again, this is Bernie Sanders who's presented this plan. I don't think it's something that's universally supported by the full Democratic Party, but I think as we get closer to 2020, as we get closer to the primary season, past the midterms, going into the presidential election, you will see more and more Democrats they're looking to fight for that progressive piece of the pie in the primary.
Well, you know, here's what the Gallup poll says, Charlie, on basic income. Do you support or not support? 52% say they don't support it. Then they ask people this, the more important question perhaps, are you willing to pay higher taxes so that everybody gets a basic income? 54% said no, absolutely
no,
not.
Thanks. No thanks. Yeah, exactly. You know, and I think it's wonderful that Bernie Sanders is now in support of work. I think that's a good thing. But if he supports work, why doesn't he support lowering the income tax on people who currently work for a living? That would be a great step in the right direction. But going back to your time in the Soviet Union, can you imagine the quality of life that those hall monitors had in the Soviet Union? It was dreadful.
Not great. Not great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Great
Thank
to
you.
see you both.
Martha. You too.
Quick break. More story when we come right back.